To all the American soldiers, veterans, the ones who are still alive, I want to thank you for your service. Because of you, I'm able to live here in this great country and have the freedom that I have today to travel about, to do anything I want to do. The sky's the limit. And all of that is afforded because you fought for my freedom. I'm here in America because of you, so I'm paying forward whatever it is that you did. I recognize your sacrifice. I thank you for your service. I love the American flag, and I will always honor and respect the American flag because it represents your sacrifice. It represents freedom, freedom of speech, freedom to do whatever you want to do in this country because of that flag. And that flag exists because of your service. And I'm sorry most of your friends didn't get to come home, or some of them. They're being honored in Washington, D.C., on the granite wall. They are the superheroes, and you, veterans, are warriors. Welcome home. Thank you for your service. And I appreciate everything that you have done for our people, meaning the Vietnamese. I'm an American citizen. I honor this country. I vote. And I will always advocate for veterans. Thank you. Thank you for your service. My dad was a high-ranking official. He was the colonel in the National Police Force. And unbeknownst to us, until we came to America, he was a CIA operative for Operation Phoenix. My name is John Nguyen, and I live in Chino Hills, California. I've been in this country since May of 1975. We landed at El Toro Air Base in a Pan Am 747 in the middle of the night, and we were bused down to Camp Pendleton, the Marine base, and we lived there for a month, and then we were sponsored by a church, Christianity, non-denomination, and there is where our journey started in America. Yes, I was a child, and it was very traumatic on a daily basis growing up as a child. We were constantly being threatened by the communists, the guerrilla, that they were trying to assassinate my father and kill the rest of his family, myself included. My dad never talked about Operation Phoenix, with the exception for when we were back home. He would have people coming to the house for meetings, and they would go into their studies and the study, and then they would shut the door and they'll come out sometime later, and I would see my father burn the documents that he apparently reviewed or something and threw it in a metal wastebasket. And we saw that frequently with a file with a top secret stamped on it or something.
How old were you at this time? Approximately.
At the time when my dad started doing all that I started realizing maybe I was 10. And when we left Vietnam, I was 12. And it was very traumatic every single day that we were living, because we were constantly being threatened by the communists, by radio, by letters. They said they capture our whole family. They would torture us piece by piece, and to make sure that my father is good and dead, wanted dead or alive. I was born and raised in Da Nang, which is the central part of Vietnam, and we lived a very sheltered life. we had bodyguards. We were driven to school. Um, we couldn't go out and play with other children. And the most traumatic part that I experienced was that a couple of my classmates died by its indiscriminate mortars at night, shelling in by the Viet Cong, and would hit their home. And the next morning the teacher would stand up and say, so and so is no longer with us, his family was killed last night, and basically there was nothing left of the family to pick up the pieces.
So you would learn this in school, like in a classroom setting?
Yes. And we basically were desensitized to death and destruction. When we are on the streets driven by our bodyguards or somewhere, we would see dead bodies of VCs lining up on the sidewalk in the corner of the street or in the middle of a roundabout. And that was a psychological warfare, propaganda showing that, hey, we catch you, we're going to kill you. So stop your communist threat and killing people, because we are going to kill you. So I could remember as far back as maybe I was 5 or something, or 6. My dad was in Tam Kee, and we were flown to Chu Lai Airport, my mother and I, to visit him. And all I knew was that we got picked up by military airplanes and would fly us to unknown places. And there would be a convoy at the airport, Chu Lai Airport, which is nothing but a strip. They would pick us up, and we would have a convoy, and we'd be in the middle, and would move to my father's compound. And then at some point the convoy stopped because they detected an IED up front, and I think it was the US Marine that was escorting us, and they came out and they disabled the IED, and one of the Marines picked me up and put me on his shoulder and walked me, and then he walked me to a location where there was a hole on the ground, and he pointed down there, and down there was a dead VC that had been killed. So he jumped in there, lit a cigarette, put it in the dead VC, took a picture of that, and later gave it to me. And when we ran for our lives, all our photos, kids, family, all that we left behind, the soldiers treated us extremely well. They were very respectful, and they were very loving. And that's when I saw how wonderful the American soldiers were to us and to the people, because I would see them go into villages and inoculate poor people, children, and if there were some medical needs, they would tend to those people. It's the same thing as winning the hearts and mind in Afghanistan. They were doing that in Vietnam, and that model went way back at that time, that they wanted the Vietnamese people to trust them. And my father was he was very supportive of the American forces in Vietnam, because he was a very patriotic man. Here we're having help from another country to help eliminate communism, and he was extremely proud and happy to have the American forces fighting. And the saddest day I remember is when my dad came home and said that the forces are pulling out and going home. And he said pretty much that it's over. If we don't have the help from the American forces, we're not going to win this war because we're being defunded, and of course, North Vietnamese getting equipment, money, whatever it is, from Russia and China at the same time, and they weren't stopping. The sad thing about the war and the death of 58,479 U.S. Men and women soldiers was that they weren't allowed to win the war. They were there to make some noise, to show China that, hey, don't mess with America. I mean, we have the capability of doing this, but had no intention of winning the war, but sacrificed 58,000 American lives who would never see their family again, would never have a family, would never produce children. And that saddened me really, really bad once I came to this country. And when I came, you know, I endure a lot of adversity because of my ethnicity, because kids would beat up on me because of you, I don't have a father anymore. You know, I was too young to even realize, and but eventually I understood, and I told them I'm sorry, and I live with the guilt that American soldiers died in Vietnam for me, and that became something that I built in my mind along with my father. And he said that you're here in America, you are given a second chance to live, learn the language, assimilate with the American culture, get an education, get a job, pay your taxes, and never ask for handouts, because you are living in the land of opportunity. So the only thing that stops you is you. And he would mention that nightly, you know, during dinner table. And the other thing that he taught us too, he said, and because of the American forces, you are alive and you are living in this greatest country on earth. Do not ever disrespect any of the veterans. And if you see one, you help him out, or he or she, whatever. So when I was younger, you know, now that I'm a teenager living in America, I bought a $5 lawnmower at a garage sale, so I would walk around and ask people to have their lawn mowed for like $5. And I knocked on the door and I talked to this man, and it turned out that he was a Vietnam veteran at the time. And he said, yeah, I served in Vietnam. And he said, come on in, and he, you know, pour cold drinks and stuff for me. And I mowed his lawn and he paid me. And I came home and I told my father, and my father said, let's go back there. He said, John, we'll mow your lawn at no charge from now on. And I didn't understand. And he said, that man fought for your freedom. You're gonna repay him. And that's how he taught us. And you know, is to appreciate the sacrifice of these soldiers did. Now, when my father came over here, he went from being a colonel and had his own bodyguards, his DC-3 at the airport, his helicopter on top of the house and everything, to be a janitor at a school. He tried to contact the U.S. government, but they told him that don't ever contact us again. You know, your mission is done. And so that was it. And, you know, not having an education enough to get a good job in America, my dad took the job whatever he could to support his family. And he would sit down and tell us, say, look, I can do this, and I can swallow my pride. You guys can do the same, but I'm the stepping stone for you guys to get better because you are young. So take advantage of what America can give you, and the sky is the limit. Go get an education, learn the language, assimilate, and you know, pay your taxes. And he hated handouts, people asking for and demand for whatever their needs are. He said, as long as you have 2 hands, 2 feet, you're going to go to work. And we all did. We would take up jobs like painting apartments on the weekend for $1 an hour. And my dad said, you get out there and you make that $8. And of course, I didn't get to keep any of it because we needed every dollar to, take care of the household. We got no help. The church who sponsored us.
How many siblings did you have?
There are 6 of us kids altogether. There are 3 boys, 4 boys and 2 girls. I'm next to the youngest. And all of us became extremely successful. I have 3 brothers who graduated with engineering degrees, and they work for defense contractors, making top secret stuff for the government. They couldn't even talk about it. And I have a younger sister who became a very successful fashion designer, and another sister who was an engineer working for a fireplace, and then when she retired, she did what she wanted to do, was open up a flower shop, and then she has recently sold that. My father passed away in 2008, and before he did, I sat down with him and I asked him about the work that he did, and he told me what he had to do. Was basically Operation Phoenix was to find out where the infiltrators were, capture and interrogate to obtain information of how many people are on the way in or how many people are already infiltrated. So that's what made him a very unpopular person, and very unfortunate that some of our family members, relatives, were commie sympathizers. So they turned my dad in. Whatever move he made, the communists knew what he was doing, and my dad was always wondering why they knew, and he would never imagine that his own bloodline would betray him. My dad was very well respected by the community and the relatives and people, because he was doing the thing to protect our country, and he was proud, and he would never let anything compromise his job, like being, for lack of a better word, a dirty politician on the take or anything like that. He loved Vietnam, and he spoke fluent French because we were colonized by the French for 100 years. So pretty much all the adults back then had to learn the language, and I have aunts and uncles that were very educated by the French, which I'm not very happy with, but they spoke fluent French. And when I was old enough to realize that Americans came to our country, and for whatever reason, I always thought, wow, America, I wonder what it's like, and I would see pictures of Mount Rushmore and all the beautiful sceneries of America, and I said, someday I'm gonna live in that great country. I mean, I just said it, in my mind, and would read magazines and just put my mind in that photo and say that I'm living in that country. It's like watching Willy Wonka's in a chocolate factory, and I find myself immersing in that movie. And the same thing as seeing pictures of America, of how beautiful she is. And I am extremely lucky to have been brought here after the war to live in this great country. When we were in Da Nang, and the city was getting ready to go because they were shelling mortars into the city and trying to destroy the airport. My dad packed us all up, with bodyguards and stuff, and drove to Da Nang Airport, which the air base is right there. And at the airport, there was a DC-3 waiting for us. And I didn't know at the time, but it says Air America on it. and my dad said, we are waiting for the pilot to come. And he had a radio or something, and he says, when you hear White Christmas, that means it's the time to go. So we waited.
Like the song White Christmas?
Yes, Bing Crosby. But that was the code word, and the music as well. And well, White Christmas never came in Da Nang. So, and at this time, it was getting really bad. You know, they're shelling in, and you can see stuff, people dying from the distance. And my dad said, we can't wait. So he rounded up all of us up in a Jeep, and we had like maybe a entourage of 4 or 5 Jeeps. Then we went to the Da Nang River, and which is a place where large ship would come in and dock. And there was a hospital ship from Germany, which was in Da Nang at the time, treating a lot of sick people. But any event, in the middle of the river was a cargo ship that people were jumping in and trying to get on the ship so it can be saved. My dad commandeered a little boat, and he brought my sister, my 2 sisters, 1 brother, my uncle, a cousin, and I believe my grandmother. And we got to the cargo ship, which is in the middle of the river, and we got on it by climbing on the cargo nets, and I don't even know how I did it or how my grandmother even got on, but we got on. My dad returned to shore to pick up my mom and my older brother. So when he did, the ship pulled up anchor and left. So at this time, we lost our parents. And 3 days later, we were in Saigon, and no parents. We were homeless. We had no guidance, and we had an older uncle who said that I think he had a brother or something in Saigon, which they found, but we weren't really welcome there because, for whatever reason, you know, I'm too young to remember, but we weren't really welcome there. And I don't remember how long until we were playing in the front yard one day, and we saw this taxi pulling up. And before the taxi had come to a complete stop, the door swung open. It was my mother. She ran to us and just grabbed us, and she said, they told us your ship was torpedoed and you all are dead. There was no news whatsoever. And somehow she, my father, and my brother got on another ship, and they were going south, and my mom, she said she kept looking for floating luggage, and but she couldn't see anything. She said that I'm pretty sure that you all were dead. And we thought that my parents had died or they had been killed. So the story was, once the ship took off, my father, my mother, and my brother went into hiding. My dad grew his facial hair so he couldn't be recognized. And basically he looked like Yasser Arafat at the time, you know, with towels and stuff wrapped around his head. And the communists was actively looking for him. They couldn't go back to the house because they had already occupied our home. And I think when my relatives came in from Hue, they went to our house and they send words out that whatever way, however my dad received news, he said, do not come home, they're waiting for you. And by that time, Da Nang had been fallen to the Viet Cong, so there were posters put up in the city that my dad was wanted dead or alive. And no, doesn't matter what it takes. We want him dead or alive, and we'll reward you for bringing him in. And so my mom and dad got out, and they were on a ship, and they didn't say much. They almost lost their lives trying to cling onto this boat that was going south to Saigon. And my dad ended up saving a life of a woman who had fallen, and he jumped in, grabbed her and pulled her back onto the boat.
She had fallen out of the boat?
Yes.
She was escaping in?
Yeah. And if it weren't for my dad, that woman wouldn't be alive today. And my mom was scared to death because she didn't want to lose her husband. She said, bad enough that we heard that you guys have been killed. I don't want to lose anymore. And I had an older brother who was in college at the time, and he escaped on his own somehow, and he found his way to Saigon and reunited with us. And so once we were reunited with our parents, my dad started making phone calls to whoever, and it was getting really bad now. So the last phone call he made, he said, just take a taxi to the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. So we got there, my dad went in there, and there were just thousands of people hanging there. And he came out with papers and everything in his hands, and they pointed at the bus. We got on the bus, and my dad said, we're not safe yet. And it was chaos. And this is 2 weeks before April 30th of 1975. And so whatever money he had in his pocket, he just threw it out the window for the people out there because it's worthless now. So the bus drove us to Tan Son Nhut Airport in Saigon, and my dad said, don't move, don't say anything, because there were soldiers actively looking at paperwork and stuff. And he said, because of my older two brothers who were of age, of the military, they would have taken him back. So anyway, we got on this cargo airplane, the C-141 Air Force, U.S. Air Force. And I think 5 hours later, we landed in Manila, Clark Air Base. And I can remember when it landed, I could see the green grass, and the first thought that came to my mind was freedom. No more war. I don't have to worry anymore. Going to bed at night in the bomb shelter or whatever, bunker, wasn't fun. And as a kid, you were so scared of the sound of explosion that we would lose our bladder control. Each time you hear that thing, it's like persona non grata. And
your whole life you lived in war.
Yes.
Your whole life.
Yes. And so we lived on Clark Air Base for a week, and then Ferdinand Marcos kicked the Americans out of Clark Air Base. And so we all had to leave. And we were flown to Guam, and it was the most miserable time of my life. It was so hot.
In Guam?
In Guam,
okay.
Yeah. And red dirt and centipedes crawling everywhere, and we were living in a tent. And maybe 3 or 4 days later, we boarded a 747 Pan Am, and the next destination was Honolulu. We landed there probably for fuel or something. And I can remember it was daylight, when the 747 was banking to land, and I could see these beautiful islands, and somebody said, "That's Hawaii." And I said, "Oh my God, I remember seeing that. You know, it's like paradise." And we looked at the blue ocean, the green scenery, and all of that. And again, I reiterated in my mind that freedom at last. And then, you know, we weren't allowed to leave the airport, and we boarded back into the 747, and we flew to El Toro Air Base, which is in Irvine, California. There was a Marine base there at the time. And it landed in the middle of the night in May, and we were freezing cold. This is the first time stepping off the airplane and on American soil in the middle of May, but we were freezing because we weren't used to the weather. You know, we lived in
120 degrees.
Yes. Okay, so we landed on El Toro Air Base. I was freezing cold, had on a pair of shorts, t-shirt, and flip-flop. So as we got out, I mean, I was just visibly shaken. And then the Marines came over and gave us a bunch of jackets. And, you know, back then, the huge jacket that they wore, it was like a dress on me, but I didn't mind at all because, you know, it was shielding me. Yes, it was a warm dress. So, and then we were placed in a bus, onto a bus, and then it drove all the way down to Oceanside where Camp Pendleton was. And there we lived in Tent City for 1 month. And, you know, it was a large tent that would fit 10 people. The floor is grass. And once again, centipedes, bugs, all of that. But we didn't care because we have freedom now. So I didn't care whether I was sleeping on a cot with bugs crawling on me. In the morning we line up to get breakfast, and we were served by the Marines, and from a distance we could see deer walking, and just beautiful weather. And it was just like, wow, is this what America is all about? And mind you, we didn't have a dime on us. We didn't have anything, but we just wait to be fed, you know, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And again, the soldiers treated us really nice. I mean, the Marines, you know, they always smiling. And they had civilians coming in to interact with us. And, you know, they taught us to play game, to do this and do that. They were just volunteers. And that's where I saw the humanity part of America. So these people actually cared about us to come in to interact with us. I didn't speak a word of English then. And, you know, we just basically hand signals or whatever it is. They spoke English, I spoke Vietnamese. And neither of us understood anything. But
was your dad fluent in English?
He wasn't. He's not fluent like I am, but he spoke English, and that's how he dealt with the company back then when they recruited him. He spoke enough to know what was going on. And I remember that, you know, they said if you have gold, you can go sell it in at this command center somewhere, and a lot of people had gold. And we're just sitting there with our jaws dropped because the amount of gold that people were bringing in. They were selling it off so they can have money to buy luggage and clothes and stuff at the PX. And, you know, we sat there and go, okay. And then civilians would bring in piles of clothes. And then we were directed to a certain location, and you just go in there and go rummage through and find whatever it would fit you. Yeah. And, you know, I found a nice jacket and a pair of shoes and a couple of pair of pants, and I was content, you know, because you know, we didn't want to grab a whole bunch, and we just needed something to cover ourselves, especially a jacket. It was what I needed, and I remember that. And it seemed a lot longer, but we stayed there for a month. And then they said a church has sponsored a group of people from our group to go to Glendale, California. And we were put on a bus, and we were bused to this resort up on the mountain, Angeles Forest Highway. It's a really nice resort. It belonged to the church that sponsored us. And it was summertime, so we lived there for almost 3 months. And again, they fed us, the church provided food, and then we would work around the compound to keep the pools, the facilities clean, the church and all of that. And then we were sponsored by a family from the city of Burbank. And they basically just got us out, and then we rented a one-bedroom home with one bathroom, with no door, for 8 of us, you know. But we survived it, you know.
And when you say they sponsored you, what does that mean? They paid for you to have this room, or
No.
they were responsible for you for a year, or what does that mean?
That's what we thought, but it was an elderly couple. So basically, once we got out, they got us out of the camp and up in the mountains. We were on our own. My dad had to go look for a home, and he found this car that he paid $500 for. It's like a 1967 Dodge Dart or something, 2-door, and fit 8 of us in there, you know. And then with that car, he was able to find odd jobs to make ends meet. My brother bought a used bicycle, and he would ride to a restaurant where he's a busboy, and he would come home in the middle of the night with a bag of change, because that was the tip that they gave him. And with that money, you know, we just put it in a pile to help our parents with it. And I would go and paint for the landlord, you know, and he said, if you mow the lawns for all the property that we have, I will reduce the rent. And I don't know what the arrangement was, but we became landscapers, and twice a week we would have to go and mow all the property that he owned. He was a very smart guy, you know. So we did that until 1978, and we moved to Fullerton, California, when my dad found a job at an electronics shop. And then, you know, we all were still working. My brothers were in college, and the first one to graduate from Cal Poly Pomona, he got a job as an engineer. Now he's starting to support our family. And then my oldest brother, who was a busboy, got a really nice job, you know, at this factory making drill bits for oil drilling. And then he was going to college at the same time, and he got his bachelor's in engineering, mechanical engineering or something. And then he started working for McDonnell Douglas. And my other brother was still in college, and then eventually he graduated, and first job was engineer for McDonnell Douglas. My second oldest brother worked for Northrop, and my oldest brother was working for McDonnell Douglas as well. And that's how we made it. You know, we pulled the money together, and I think my dad and my brother was able to buy their first home. And
Together, they pulled together?
Yes. That's the only way to make it when you're new in this country and you don't have anything. If you divide, you'll fall. If you unite, you're gonna make it. And we all knew that, you know, we can't work and keep the money to ourselves. So whatever money I made, I would give it to my parents, because I knew they were helping. And the greatest thing to wake up was knowing that we're living in America. So it didn't matter if I was sleeping on the floor. It didn't matter if I had a ripped up sleeping bag, and I would fold it up every morning, you know, and treat it like it was a prize. we didn't waste anything. So the first time we moved to Fullerton, we heard fireworks, and that was coming from Disneyland. And the first thing I did when I heard the boom, I went underneath the table without even thinking, without anything, because now I'm back in Vietnam mode. Because every time you hear that rumbling sound, it's time to go into the bunker. And so I was trained to do that. And then I said to myself, wait a minute, this is America. That's fireworks. And we got to see the fireworks, and then that's how I would teach myself to saying that we're not in danger anymore. And then I growing up doing odd jobs. After high school, I got a job at Knott's Berry Farm, and fireworks were going off. But see, if I'm aware of the sound that's coming, then it doesn't bother me. But if something happens behind me and I don't expect it, I would do this. And it's hard for me to explain to my wife and my kids, because to them it's just normal. Somebody drops a bowl, it's shattered. Okay, no big deal. To me, it was bringing back memories that I did not want to live. And even now, if I hear car backfire or something that happens that I don't expect, then it would get to me. And when I was a cop, I thought, seeing a dead body was no big deal. It was a big deal now, because I put all that stuff behind me, enter a new career, looking at a body bleeding on the ground, and I said, this is not normal. And although I've seen it before, I didn't make a big deal out of it, but I had a hard time, seeing something fresh, lying there.
And is to you, for someone who actually experienced it?
Well, colonization is basically a rich country, a developed country would go into an undeveloped country and extract the natural resources from that country without compensating them. That's the French. They got gold, they got rubber and everything. And I remember stories that my aunt was telling me. One of my aunt was raped by a French soldier and ended up having a child from it. But that was kept from us because it was like a taboo to talk about. So when so they would run the rubber plantation, Michelin and all that, and they would use the Vietnamese people for labor, basically slavery. And so when the workers would complain, they would kill that person and bury that person underneath the rubber tree for fertilization process. And they treated us really bad. And we were second-class citizens from what I remember the adults were telling me. They didn't like us. Unlike the Americans, when they came in, the Americans treated us really nice. And we didn't feel like it was we were being colonized, but we were being helped. So that's another story as to why we love the Americans' presence so much. They loved us, treated us really nice, fought for us, died for us, and sacrificed their lives for us. So my dad taught us that he said, you see a veteran, you reach out your hand and you thank him. And if you see a veteran that's hungry or he needs help or something, you give yourself to that person. Do whatever you can. And because when we were younger, when we lost our parents for a short time, people fed us. And my father would always say, if you see somebody hungry, you feed that person. Because someday if you're hungry, again, somebody will feed you. And my dad he lived life using Buddhist philosophy. Buddhism was really big in Vietnam, and it doesn't teach us to kill. It doesn't teach us to mistreat one another. It's to be kind to one another and respect uh, elderly people, respect your relatives. You know, you have to be kind, and you have to address them accordingly. And but that's our culture. So when we came here, and I saw kids talking back to their parents, and I'm going, holy moly, you know, if I did that, I would get my face would be all bruised up, and I probably deserved it, you know. But we didn't do that. But my dad said to, hello, Steve, to respect the Vietnam veterans and thank them every chance. So in 2000, you know, I've always reached out to veterans and helped them and stuff. So in 2019, I was watching a video on YouTube that was made by a man named Larry Capetto, and I watched the whole thing that night. It was like you read a book that's so good you don't want to put it down. So I watched the whole thing, and one man stood out in that video to me, and his name is Lee Alley, Lieutenant Lee Alley from Wyoming, and he was in the 9th Infantry, the 5th of the 60th, and here it is. So I reached out to him the next day, and to me it was a godsend, because what are the chances that you find a phone number and that person would answer? He answered, and Lee said, hi. And I said, hi. I said, you don't know me, but are you Lee Alley? And she said, yeah. Well, I said, I'm a Vietnamese from California, and I saw you on the video. I want to reach out and thank you for your service. And it was a quiet moment, and Lee said, wow, you truly made my day. And we talked about it, and there was some emotional moments that we were sharing over the telephone. And he said, can you do me a favor? And I said, anything. He said, can you come to my group in St. Louis and speak to them about your experience and what you just told me about how the U.S. soldiers treated us, treated your people over there? And I said, absolutely. So it was January of 2019. I stayed in contact with Lee until June of 2019, and that's when I flew to St. Louis with my wife. I wanted her to be there because we don't talk about my life growing up pretty much, and I kept it to myself. I only share bits and pieces. And I believe my speech went on for over an hour, and not a dry eye in the audience. And I told the veterans who were sitting down there in the audience that you guys were heroes. You treated us so nice. You were not baby killers, despite what some people were saying when you came home and you weren't welcome. And I'm so sorry for that. And I'm so sorry that you lost your friends over there. And, you know, I said, you guys are the warriors. The heroes are the ones whose names are etched on the wall in Washington, D.C. And I said, as long as I live, I will honor you folks for the rest of my life for fighting for my freedom. And a man came up to me after, and he said, John, I have avoided Vietnamese people all these years. When I drive downtown and I see something that's Vietnamese, I would go the other way. I hated you guys. I hated you so much. But tonight, you changed my mind forever. And I said, sir, we have nothing but respect for Vietnam veterans. We love you, we support you, and you should. And, you know, this man's from Chicago. His name is Frank Helligy. He was with the 5th 60th Bandito, Charlie, which they sponsored me, gave me an honorary membership to their group, which is very amazing. And so we've been in contact, and the last reunion is supposed to have been last year, but it got delayed because of COVID. So rescheduled for this year in June, which I attended, and I was asked to speak again. This time the attendance was a lot less because there's people still fearful of COVID, and plus it's expensive to travel with the gas prices as it is and airfare. But I got to meet some new veterans, and um, I gave my speech, and I thanked them again. And there were some donut dollies that were there, and they came up and they talked to me, and they thanked me for my speech. And I tell you, the U.S. soldiers and the American nurses from the Red Cross and from the military, they were amazing people. I mean, the soldiers revered these people for saving their lives, endless. And the first killed nurse that was killed in Vietnam, her name was Sharon Lane, and she's from Ohio. And then there was a few more that died in Vietnam thereafter, maybe about 6. And they just loved the donut dollies. The donut dollies were civilians; they weren't soldiers. But when they came home, they too were doused with Agent Orange and they're beginning to get sick. But the government wouldn't recognize them for treatment or anything because they were civilians at the time. They weren't soldiers, so therefore you're on your own. The only thing I regret about the U.S. government is that you send your boys in to fight a war, but you didn't care if they died. And you tied one hand behind their back. Rule of engagement only applies to the U.S. soldiers, but not the enemy. They could care less. The enemies murdered so many people, civilians, in the middle of the night. And my dad lost a few friends like that. And and they say, well, the Viet Cong say, well, U.S. soldiers tortured us like crazy. I saw videos of a U.S. soldier get brought in to a tent to be treated, and a VC that was shooting at that soldier, and he was wounded, and the American treated that VC. Now you tell me if that's not humanity. Nobody would ever do that, but because of the Geneva Convention, we Americans adhere to it. But the enemies will never recognize that. Only America, where, oh yeah, we can't shoot until we're fired upon, and if our enemy is injured and you see them, you have to render aid. And they did, not just one time, many times that I saw. They get brought into the compound. My dad said, "What are you doing?" They said, "We have to do it."
Well, honorable.
I love America. I thank the U.S. soldiers for fighting for my freedom so that I can live here peacefully, have the greatest life. I'm married, I have 2 kids, wonderful children, and I have a job, and I have freedom. I fly the American flag 365 days a year with the light on, shining at night. I will never take it down. If it fades, I replace it with another one and properly dispose of the old one. And that's how much I respect this country and the flag. I know we have the First Amendment, and I know the people burned the flag. That bothers me more than anything. Yeah, you can say you don't like it, but to me, burning the flag is an act of traitor. If I'm not mistaken, traitors used to get shot and executed. But to burn the American flag is the most disrespectful thing that you can do to that American soldiers. They died for that flag. And it's not just a flag, it represents freedom.
And many have lost limbs.
Yes.
Or lived with scars, invisible scars their whole life.
When I go to the VA hospital, and my job requires me to go there for a legal purpose, and I see Vietnam vets sitting there very sick. They're just waiting to die. And I remember going to the Long Beach VA, and I went to a ward where there was a huge room with a bunch of beds, and the guys are just laying there sick, waiting to go. And I come up and I talk to them, and then we had a motorcycle group where we would buy socks and slippers and everything. We'd come in and we put them on their feet and they would cry. They said, we don't have any relatives. You're the first visitor that we've had in all these years. And I said, we just want to come here and thank you for your service. Thank you for fighting for our freedom, for our lives, because we recognize your sacrifice. Thank you so much
Is
for...
there anything else that you wanted to say before?
Yes, I want to thank you for what you do. You are a civilian, you're a young person, but you saw what this country has done for you and what the veterans are doing. So you are volunteering your time, your own money to go around the country to interview veterans. And I cannot stress enough how grateful I am to have met you, and you're giving me this opportunity to deliver my words to America and to the veterans all over the United States and even Australia and Canada and the South Koreans. ROK were awesome in Vietnam. But, you know, my first love for veterans, I mean for the Americans, were of course the Marines, because they landed in Da Nang, and then got to know the Air Force, Navy, and Army. And then gotten to know a lot of veterans here in America, and I will always stay in touch with them. I check on their health, I call them, and recently I gotten to know a veteran from this group that I attended, and he passed away in April. But I got to talk to him in March, and I felt good that I got to talk to him, and I felt good that I thanked him profusely, and he said no one's ever called me and thanked me like that before. So I think I did my job, and I know he's up in heaven now. He's not suffering anymore. Thank you for the opportunity for me to sit here and tell you my story.
My pleasure. Did you want to give him a shout out, his name?
Cliff Porras of the 9th Infantry, 5th and 60th, Bandito Charlie. He lived in Florida, and may he rest in peace. And there's another person that I want to shout out to, was Captain Hector Villarreal. Very difficult name for people, so they used to call him Captain V. But I met him in 2019, and he passed away last year. I got to talk to him before he passed away. Just a wonderful human being. His legacy is being carried on by a Vietnam veteran. He was a medic. His name is Tony Fuentes in San Antonio, Texas. And Tony, I'm proud of you, buddy. Thank you for carrying on the work.
I love that. Is that a prayer bracelet that you have on?
No, the bracelet is of a, his name is David Tiffany. He died in Vietnam on 28th of May 1969, and he was with the 9th Infantry, 6th of the 50th. And there's a man in Kentucky, his name is Barney Tharp. Staff Sergeant Barney Tharp served with David Tiffany. David was from Riverside, California. And so ever since I knew of him, and my office being in Riverside, I bought the bracelet, and I wear it in his honor. He lost his life in Vietnam, again, to fight for my freedom. And I gotten to know his sisters, some of his family. But David Tiffany will always be on my wrist, and I wear it every single day to remember him. And in my high school, there was another individual that died. You know, his name is Randall Rea. So he graduated from Fulton High School, 1966, went to Vietnam and lost his life there. I also have his bracelet, and I interchange wearing them. People ask me, why do you do that? And I said, if you were in my position, you would know why, because those people die for my freedom. and I will always and forever honor what they did for us.
I love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. God bless you for all that you're doing, and to have the gratitude. You know, sometimes gratitude is so easily waned, and it hasn't with you.
Well,
I almost feel like it's increased.
it gotten stronger since I met you, because I saw what you were doing, and it just motivated me to go out there and do more for the veterans. And I want to thank you for what you do, because I see your stuff online, I see it on Facebook, and I always watch it religiously.
Right.
And I share your material on Facebook.
Oh, good. Yes, you do.
Thank you, Susan.
No, thank you.